You're listening to Expertly Said, a podcast on the art and impact of communication. I'm Kristen Sweeney, founder and CEO of Every Little Word. So my guest today is Kim Fox. Kim is a senior healthcare communications leader with more than 30 years of experience shaping global and U.S. strategies across pharmaceutical, biotech, media, and public relations organizations. She's held leadership roles at Milestone Pharmaceuticals, Bristol Myers Squibb, Johnson & Johnson, Everyday Health, Sanofi, Novartis, and top communications agencies. Kim is also passionate about advancing women's leadership and education and has served on the boards of the Healthcare Business Women's Association and Summit Educational Foundation. Kim, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kristen. Thanks so much for having me. This is so great.
I'm really excited to have you here. That resume, whoa. So I'd love to kind of go back in time a little bit to kick us off. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? Did you always know that you wanted to be a communicator?
I did not. I was an English major back in college, and I think I'll share a story. I mean, this is going way back in time about the importance of networking, because I actually have a son now who's applying to colleges, and we're having this debate all the time about using your network versus doing something off on your own. And I was a senior in college. My dad's like, you better get a job. You're going to have no health insurance once you graduate. Went to the dentist, and my dental hygienist helped me get my job in communications. Go figure. So,
Come on.
Yeah, right? Can you believe that?
I love it.
I was an English major studying like Shakespeare and Chaucer and, horror films even, but didn't really know anything about healthcare communications. But she happened to board horses, and Lisa Burns of Burns McClellan's uncle boarded horses, and the dental hygienist connected me to the uncle who connected me to Lisa Burns, and there you go. I had a job coming out of college learning about healthcare and biotech communications and investor relations. And it was just, it was it was like a great first job out of college. But again, I really didn't know. And my advice would be to anybody who's like at that beginning of their career, talk to everyone and anyone about what you like, ask for help, take help. And that's how I got my foot in the door, which has ended up being a 3-decade career now.
That's so fascinating. First, I also studied Chaucer in college. I was an actor and a medieval studies major. And so for my senior project, I combined the two and directed a version of one of the Canterbury Tales. And anyway, so it brought me back there for a minute.
That's awesome. I live right down the street from Drew University, and I still love going to their Shakespeare Festival every summer. So yeah. I'm still a fan.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, I'm a small business owner and have spoken to a lot of people over the years. And one of the first things I ever tell anyone who's striking out on their own is, I'm like, this is not a sophisticated strategy. Just send an email to everyone you know, put them on BCC, but send an email to everyone you know and tell them what you're doing. Because I think sometimes we think about those changes and transitions in our lives so much, but we don't realize that to other people, it's a blip. It's nothing. You haven't actually told them about this big change in your life or what you're really wanting. And so just putting it out there and using that network to find those opportunities is always a really good way to get started. Right. That's great.
And it was funny because I had an internship when I was in college at Xerox, and I was doing newsletters and interviewing people and writing articles and learning how to do distribution, which was paper newsletters. It wasn't on email yet.
Yeah, right.
Kidding myself. But I didn't even know that those skills equated to doing communications, public relations. And so again, when you're early about talking about what you like, sharing those experiences, it helps people who have had a longer tenure in their career to be able to say, oh, have you thought about this career or that career, or write your LinkedIn profile this way or your resume that way. I still am friends with somebody who, after my 3 years working, I went and interviewed her with her for a job, and she just gave me insight to how I explained the work I had done the first 3 years in my career. I just hadn't described it in a way that was creating the value. I was had this laundry list of stuff I did, and she was, we were just actually reminiscing about it this summer with my kids sitting by my side about how she had helped me in, how do you summarize that work into the value that you delivered versus I did all this stuff, because then it just becomes really tactical and not as strategic.
Well, and the irony is that's probably so easy for you to do with anybody else, but to do it for yourself is always infinitely harder, right?
It is. And I do find that so true about our jobs as communicators. We got to, see each other recently at a conference. I am so good at preparing people to do their speeches, write their speeches, tell them how to tell their speeches differently. But when I had to get up on stage, I was like, where's my communication? I don't want on the stage all by myself and do this. And so it's a lot easier to do our jobs behind the scenes, I think, and advise people than to actually do be the one that puts yourself up there. I mean, and it's easier to others than do it yourself.
Honestly, it's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about this podcast, is a chance to kind of put the spotlight on the folks who usually are behind the scenes. And I have a background in performing, so I think ironically I say I don't mind that it's not my name on the byline. I don't not mind that like the job well done is generally enough satisfaction for me. I don't need to be the one kind of at the front, but it's still nice, I think, to kind of like surface the folks who make it happen behind the scenes. Yeah,
it's so true. I was at a conference this weekend and on menopause, and there's all these very influential physicians and doctors, and one of them at the beginning of her speech said, "Oh, I just took my beta blocker," and everyone laughed. And I don't know if you know this, but for people who have the little stage fright and get nervous, I know this is probably off label, I don't know, you're beta blocker to help them have the confidence to get up on stage. But here's somebody that was like a social media, very high profile, out there all the time, and for her to be vulnerable like that and tell her audience that she was nervous to be out there was something.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So we've heard about how you got into kind of pharma, biotech, got into the industry. Tell us a little bit about why you've decided to make your career there. What do you love about it? And what do you find challenging?
Well, it's interesting because it was something that I fell into somewhat accidental, to be focused on healthcare. And throughout my career, I kept experimenting, questioning if I wanted to change. Now, there's one thing, as you become more expert and you understand it's a regulated field and how the FDA works and other regulatory authorities and compliance, you start to have an expertise that's unique and valuable. So that is one way, one reason why I stayed in it. But I also have found my life has very much paralleled my work, where my dad was diagnosed with cancer when I was working with a company that I was getting to work with cancer, KOLs, and going to the American Society of Clinical Oncology. And very coincidentally, that meeting that year was in Atlanta, and my dad was being treated for prostate cancer in Atlanta. And I'm have access to all of the world's experts who are presenting real-time data as my dad was trying to decide how to be treated, where to be treated. And that has continued on. My brother had spindle cell melanoma, 4 years ago. And so I feel like I've had a very privileged, the access that I've had to the top experts who I can query and get that help for my family. But it motivates me then to do the job I do, because, patients are waiting. And what we help to communicate, can help a patient within 5 minutes of a press release going across the wire, that they may go to their doctor and be able to ask about a clinical trial or new data or a new product approval or an update to a label that expands the what the product can be used for. So really there are patients whose lives can be improved based on what I'm communicating. So I felt it personally, as a family member and caregiver. And then I know that the work that I'm doing, has that impact, that immediate impact, in a way that, it may not be this, nothing about other industries, but maybe it's not the same as I love to shop and buy clothes and I could communicate about clothes, but it wouldn't have that same impact that it does when it's somebody who has an illness, who's, maybe life's in the balance or quality of life.
Yeah. I come from quite a medical family, and I was the one who studied Chaucer and Shakespeare, and it's been very gratifying for me when we have some pharma and life sciences clients, and to be able to do that work and feel like I can contribute in a way that still honors my gifts and my squeamishness, but still be able to contribute. And it really is, even at Fierce Pharma, there is no, to me, there's no, that when you say patients are waiting, that is the legitimate focus of everybody in the room. And I find that really inspiring.
It is. And as you were saying about being squeamish, even going a little bit back further in my timeline, when I was in high school, I worked for a physician. So I went to college thinking I wanted to go to medical school. So it was, then I became an English major instead. But what had happened was that his specialty was geriatrics, and I would be going to church every Sunday with my family, and they were reading who's sick and who's died, and I'm like, oh, I know them. I gave that, and he had taught me how to draw blood and do EKGs and the billing, and I had learned so much about the what it meant to be a doctor, but I saw also how hard he was working and how many patients he wasn't able to help. And my grandmother had gotten ovarian cancer and gone to see him, and she passed away. And again, this is my brain in college. I would advise my children differently, but I was so sad about my grandmother passing away and he wasn't able to help her, and why would I want to be a doctor? So I became this English major. So that was also the magic of landing in my career. It was that interest in medicine, but doing it through communications.
Through your way. Yeah.
It
served you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We were chatting before, and you talked about the cornerstone of your communications philosophy, and there were two words that came up: trust and transparency. Can you talk about why those are the kind of anchors for you in terms of communications?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it is so important in all forms of communications, but most particularly with healthcare. Again, there's that privilege that we have of that data and the clinical trials, and making that information available as fast and as quickly to the patients who are waiting and to need it. And you need to do it transparently. We don't always have all of the answers right away, but that's part of the transparency. It's like, this is what I can tell you today, or here's what we're still looking at. But when silence is deafening, and not knowing is worse than knowing what you can share. So again, I think it's just so important. Again, as a communications person, you're working with the C-suite, with your what's often called promotional review committee, that includes legal, medical, regulatory compliance, so that you're able to kind of follow all the right guidelines and do things, but as quickly as possible, be transparent, share the information that you can when you can, set expectations to say, this is when we can share additional information. That transparency builds trust. And I just think that is so important. And with that trust, you can build value for the company. You have customers, you have patients, you have physicians. If they have that relationship, that transparency, that trust, it's going to enable you then to have that next level of conducting business and building that value. Because they'll be comfortable working with you, partner with you, purchasing your product as a result.
Yeah, I love that you're tying speed, actually, or timeliness, let's say, to transparency. I don't think that's something I always associate with it, but it's a good point, right? Because if you're disclosing, but you're kind of sitting on that, then there's a level at which there's kind of a gray area in there. Yeah. So talking about doing that as quickly as possible. And I think it ties in too to the idea that trust works both ways, right? You have to kind of trust that your audience can accept incomplete information, and that's going to build the relationship, rather than kind of acting out of fear or trying to hide things when things are imperfect. Do you have any examples that come to mind around places where trust or transparency maybe weren't that easy? Because those are the moments, right? Where when everything's going great, it's fine to tell all quickly, but when maybe it was been a little more challenging to align with trust and transparency?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I worked a lot in the oncology space. And so again, the urgency of speed is that sometimes you can share top level data if it's going to have a significant impact on the patient, and you're doing that within days. And so there's all this scenario planning happening. Here's what we'll do. And the positive, where you're getting something that's going to say this product works for a patient, versus and I usually try to avoid in scenario planning doing positive and negative, because it's all through what lens you're telling it. But in the case of where the product didn't work as expected, it needs the same type of, it has the same impact. And so there was a product that was on the market, and we were looking at it for glioblastoma. And there was a lot of anecdotal evidence where people really thought it was going to work. So it was shocking to find out that the study didn't pan out that way. So we followed this, the same plan of action of doing the press release in the same amount of time, getting all that information out, reaching out to reporters, sharing that information, because there was patients who were going to maybe be trying to use the product or waiting to see if they could use the product. They were waiting, and this was going to be important, even though it wasn't the outcome everybody was hoping for. So it was something that not everyone agreed with in the discussion process, but we did get alignment as a company to do that. But it wasn't kind of it wasn't obvious to everyone to do that. The obvious thing was, we're going to have this data, it's going to help patients, we're going to do the big communications push. So there was initially, it wasn't that, I just don't think it was the obvious thing. It wasn't that people didn't want to do that. It wasn't just they're like, oh, okay, it didn't work, so we don't have to do that. No, we still need to do this. We still need to tell that information. And it was something that later on we did even get a president's award internally from the company to say, like, this is the type of company that we want to be, that we want to, share information, be transparent. The patients need to know what the data outcome is, regardless of the outcome, even as it isn't what we had wanted.
Right. Yeah. I mean, your values, that's the moments they're really tested, right? When things are difficult, when it's a decision to make. When it's easy, there's not much of a decision.
Right. And like, things cost money. So like, you're trying to do, if you have a marketing team who's funding your communications budget, it's a lot easier to say, spend this money because, we're going to be telling patients about a product that they're going to go buy.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot more difficult to say, spend money to tell patients about a product they're not going to use it for this indication. Right. So, I mean, they understood the case, but again, I'm sure we've all been in that seat where what's the ROI? What are the key performance indicators? How is this going to be helpful? And when it's trust and reputation, that becomes a lot softer and harder to prove and measure than when it's about potential sales.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just trust and transparency in kind of the thing that is communicated, right, in that press release or that internal email or the announcement. I think those are also really important inputs into building rapport. In comms, you've got to be across the organization. You're kind of the glue, getting information from all the different business units and departments and experts. So what strategies do you use that you find most effective in building that trust, with colleagues or, could be external partners, KOLs, kind of prior to here's the final thing that we're publishing?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely usually find regular communications is very important with like your key stakeholders, but I often see that there's like 2 rounds of iterating because there's the investigative listening phase where maybe I have an idea of what we should do, but talking to the key stakeholders about here's the problem or question we're trying to solve, and then do another sweep with those same stakeholders to say kind of here's the, the draft strategy, and getting their input. So I think, creating collaborative process is certainly, as a communications person, there's some things I'm responsible for creating, but being collaborative and getting the iterative input along the way so that my stakeholders are kind of understanding where we're going, getting the input. And this was something too I had done once with a strategic messaging track with a leadership team. I had met with them all twice. It was like the first one individually, like, what is it that you think that we want to be known for, and getting all of their voice and their input. Once I spoke to everyone, doing that a second time. So then when I was at the leadership team meeting, they'd all had touched it and gave input twice. And I had built that advocacy so that we were in that group setting. It was something that I knew that it got us to the final approval more quickly.
Yeah.
It was time consuming for me as the communicator.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a whole lot easier to say, I'm just going to go to leadership team here and the leadership team here and get everyone. Mm-hmm. So it was more time consuming for me to go to like each person and get on their calendar and reschedule and do all of that. But it got to a strong output with strong support in the end. Yeah.
As an aside, I think that's some of the, like, we talk a lot about that as like the invisible work of content and communications, right? It's not measured by how many words is the press release or, how long is the email we sent. It's definitely what are all the inputs that went into it. And that rapport is so important, right? Because giving feedback and those inputs are really valuable, but it doesn't mean the final strategy is going to reflect exactly what everybody wanted to do, right? It's our role as communicators to synthesize that and then run that through. Well, what are we actually trying to achieve? And so you might be going back to somebody and saying, yeah, you did suggest this and we aren't moving forward in that direction. And we're asking you to kind of trust, right, that we heard you, we evaluated, and maybe this isn't exactly what you hoped it would be, but we feel overall this is the best direction to go forward in.
Right. And I do think that's the most important thing in doing that collaborative work is to say, like, what made it to the final product and what was on the cutting room floor and why. And again, you can't tell everything. And, sometimes it's a little bit easier with like a narrative or messaging track can be a little bit longer, but it can be a whole lot harder when it's like that press release headline or that press release and what words fit like on that page, what doesn't. and what can be communicated in other channels. So that's the other thing too that I also find a lot of pushback on. Sometimes as communicators, we're seen as like the deliverable, like the press release, the website, the social media post. And again, I see these all as levers, and like pulling it back up to the strategic level, kind of what's that bigger narrative and story that we're trying to tell. And then all of the tactics, are all different levers that we can pull. And I always like share too, the adult learner needs to hear things 7 to 9 times. It's not like one of our communications is going to like land it and then everyone's like, oh yeah, now I know this. You have to tell them again and tell them again and tell them differently and reach them through different lenses. And I always also compare it to the library. You can go to the library and you can get a book or a magazine or a periodical or fiction, nonfiction, different videos and podcasts, and there's all these different ways that you can consume information. So again, I like to think again higher level. What's that narrative that we want to consistently tell as a company, as a leadership team, and then pull that through into all these different types of forms of content, because again, our audience is probably consuming that content lots of different ways. They may have a preference, or they might hear it. I mean, I find so often I talk about something with my friends and then like the ads are popping up on my social media feed, right? Like someone's always listening.
Yes.
But again, it's like, how do we as communicators then become that, weave all of those messages through stories, through all the different types of communication channels.
And I think too that something we think about is even in a single channel, bringing that same idea of the multiple touch points.
Yes.
I think from the outside, it can feel like, oh my gosh, I told everyone 10 times because we sent an email and we posted on this channel and we posted on this channel and we published it on our website. And, we'll have to sometimes have that conversation around like, okay, let's bring this back down to what the data should, all of those touch points. There's almost nobody in your audience who's even seeing half of them, right? Because people are consuming information differently. You're contending with algorithms. And so even in something like LinkedIn, right? If we're building up a specific executive and they're like, well, I already talked about that. And I'm like, yeah, that's all right. Yeah. And I think it's sometimes a helpful reframe of, you want to be known for that topic. You want to be known for that idea. And to be known for it, you've got to beat the drum over and over and over. Yes, not by copy pasting the same content verbatim, but really hitting the same themes. And that makes sense to us in a hypothetical, but I think sometimes when we get a little bit caught up in channels or, and don't realize that repetition is actually reinforcing the messages rather than being kind of a drag. And it's just not, it takes a lot to break through.
Yes. And I've worked with a lot of executives on their LinkedIn strategies, and I always advise that you have like 3 key themes. So I've worked with a leader, and it was, while she was leading pharmaceutical the pharmaceutical business, landed on Alzheimer's because she had a family connection there and talking about data. And it could be like and then it was, STEM education and women's leadership, and I've worked with another leader where it was like compassionate use, bioethics, and diversity. And so you just keep coming back to those themes over and over again. So you want them to be broad enough that you can have enough content, but that they become known for it. So they're posting regularly. Yeah. And then you find, then, people are engaging with that content. They're more visible. Reporters start reaching out, ask for interviews, or invite you to do speeches because now you're known for something. My other finding about LinkedIn too is I've done a lot of employee communications, and I do find you send that same message out. You think a zillion times, and then employees still don't. How did they not know? Like, we sent out so many emails and a newsletter and a reminder. But guess what? When they're tired and weary of their emails, they look on LinkedIn. And I found that, while LinkedIn is external, it is a great way to reach employees. And a lot of leaders I've supported with their LinkedIn content, at least 30% of their audience tends to be the employees of the company where they work. So it's an external forum, but a great way to piece that you need to have in your employee communications approach.
Yeah, we found that as well. And especially on the corporate channel, I would say, because, there's greater visibility on individual profiles. But that corporate channel, especially if like talent attraction is a big part of what you're trying to accomplish, folks are going to go there and check you out and see what's happening as an organization. So yeah, it can be a really nice way to kind of make that still a valuable channel, even if it's not getting the same kind of reach to a broader external audience.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So one other thing before we get into the big idea that I wanted to check in on, this idea of communicators as sometimes the truth tellers in the room. And that can mean, sometimes I'll be like, I don't mean to be the Debbie Downer, but here I go, right? Or like the one who's a little bit skeptical, or, there are positive and negative ways to frame it, but I think always having that kind of reputation at the forefront, thinking, how will this be received? Not just what do we want to say, kind of thinking about both sides of things. Can you talk about that, or maybe give some examples of tough conversations you've had to have, or some truth telling you've had to do?
Sure. And I do find like sometimes we have to be the unpopular voice in the room.
Yeah.
Because, again, you're looking to, be a company who's providing products, and you're trying to kind of say what the greatest potential can be. As the communications person, you're often coming to the table with like the scenario planning, or like I said, I always come back to the transparency and value. I had this opportunity during COVID to actually have to switch roles, and I'm sure we all think you mentioned COVID, and we all go back in time to like all the unusual things that we had to do, or kind of try to have to pivot. So I was starting a new role, and we were trying to talk to our employees about what was changing. And some employees had to stay home, some employees were needed to be in the office to for manufacturing or research, and so then different policies and different benefits were being delivered. And so was it going to be quiet, like the ones coming to the office, we're going to give them an extra week's vacation, we're going to give them some extra perks, but then will the employees staying home be upset with that? And they were getting different things. And so I said, it is so important. Like, we are doing the best that we can every day for our, the customers that we're serving, the patients that are waiting, and then as well, for our employees. So that was when we, came up with the idea of having our on-site superheroes who were having to go. And because they were our superheroes, and, at the time it was a lot easier to stay at home than like have to drive somewhere and worry about getting exposed to COVID. And so they're going to get these extra benefits. And so we celebrated it. So instead of like secret, being really transparent and, explaining what we were doing and why. And, we were continually pivoting along the way. I would say like every time I did a town hall, we had to like do it differently with like all remote, partly remote. And we kept pivoting. And I think the thing that helped build the employee engagement was that we were transparent. We were explaining what we were doing and why. And it wasn't that we had like the perfect answer every step of the way, but everyone was doing their best. Mm-hmm. And I think that came across, and I think that helped build that employee engagement and understanding.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the reframe of it, of, because you can go to the negative. Oh, people aren't going to like this. Like, right away.
That's not fair. Like, I wanted extra weeks.
Yeah.
So like when you kind of have those stories and tell those stories and, shine a light on the employees and what they're doing and why they're doing it. And you're like, oh gosh, like we want to find a vaccine, and like there's employees that are going to the office and doing this research, and it's so much harder than what I have to do here at home. So it's just different. It wasn't, that at-home employees got different perks. I still remember getting to use my gym, like the money they give towards like, having a gym membership, and getting to buy a bicycle, and I was riding my bicycle around town. It was just, because different doesn't mean one thing is better or worse. Yeah. It's just like, it's different, and it's different because, and here's what each person's role is, how they're providing, support to the company, and here's how the company is supporting each employee based on where they are.
And I think that again comes back to that giving trust, and not just trying to create it, but saying like, we trust that people can understand this, and that they can, if we communicate the message in the right way and we communicate it effectively, that they'll get it, right. and right. I think people perceive when they are trusted as well. And I think that can go a long way into kind of, it's a virtuous cycle, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So I am ready, if you are, to get into our one big idea today. So this will be a chance for us to get into the nitty gritty of like one specific experience or aspect of your work that's had a meaningful impact on how you communicate. And today's one big idea is, when does a company speak up on an issue and when do they decide not to? And I think especially in light of our trust and transparency conversation, this will be interesting. So we were chatting before, and we were both recently at the Fierce Pharma conference. And one of the things that I think I really realized was, if a company is choosing to stay silent, you better believe that is a choice that has probably had many conversations, many debates, and it's a very, very intentional. It's not an accident. They didn't miss the headline. They aren't disorganized, right? It's done on purpose. So I'd love to hear from you about, we don't have to go too specific maybe in the current climate, but I think there's certainly plenty of things that healthcare, pharma, life sciences companies could be commenting on right now. But in general, what factors go into that decision for you when you're like, here's this thing, right? It's maybe directly related to us, maybe it's affecting our industry as a whole. Do we address it or do we not?
Right. And it is, there are a lot of conversations, and I have been at companies where I've built like the criteria to make the assessment about which things to comment on. And it depends on the size of the company, in what cases, like, you're a smaller company, you're going to let the bigger company take the lead on a topic. When is the topic completely not relevant to your business? And so it doesn't make sense to spend the time or resources to make a comment. When is it something that is so important to your employee base that it's important to comment? So it's really, you need to have that criteria and the checks and balances to kind of vet what are the things that you're speaking up on. And if you speak up on one topic, then are you setting yourself up that you have to talk on all these other topics as well, because you get so and in what resource you want, and at what point you're talking about so many things that aren't your business, like that you're drowning out, like talking about your products and why you exist. And I think something that's like maybe a little bit outside of our industry, it makes sense that like Patagonia talks about the environment, because they make products that you wear outside when you're hiking, and it's really relevant to their customer base. But it doesn't, what they're speaking about that helps drive their company reputation doesn't make sense for a lot of other companies to talk about. And it's not that the other companies don't agree with it, but it just isn't relevant for them to speak on that topic.
Yeah. Tell me more about the criteria piece. Like, I'm curious how much, from your perspective, it's a matrix and it's like, oh, we got enough points, we got to talk about it, or how much is there kind of evaluation in the moment, that more qualitative, like this doesn't feel right? And who are the main, who are you bringing in, as we talked about all the different, inputs and stakeholders to make some of those decisions?
Well, I think one topic I spent a lot of time and energy on was diversity, equity, inclusion. I feel like that's a whole other like lightning bolt now. And a lot of things that were happening in the external world, and there was a lot of discrimination happening. So are you going to comment every time that there's some form of discrimination? But then if you're silent, like which ones are big, which ones are not? And so how do you, create this idea that, okay, we work at a company and belonging is important, and we can talk about belonging. And, so there were things that needed to be touched on at town hall meetings. But if we speak about, one, thing that happens with somebody being attacked, then are you gonna have to talk about the other one? And so those were the types of conversations. It's like it's not that we don't care about this one, but at which point does it rise to a level that you're talking about something? And if you address one population, like Asian versus African American versus, another group, men versus women, fat versus skinny, at what point, are you getting so fragmented and kind of losing sight? So again, it was like there were certain instances where we felt we needed to address things. There was, we heard back from employees who were African American and sharing like they were getting, what their experience is driving to work. And even though we were dressing casually at work, they would still wear suits because they were more apt to get pulled over by the police even driving to work, and like having a different environment. So like there was things that we spoke about that was relevant to our employee base, but you also didn't want to feel like you were leaving out another audience by focusing on one. I've also been finding too, I'm working on a project right now, this idea of inclusion or using inclusive language is shifting a little bit to welcoming language. So, where maybe there's some political pressures that is having DEI fall out of favor, that was like a lot of emphasis, in the past few years, we're shifting. So it's still, again, where we were, I think, for a while talking about being inclusive because you want all of your customers to feel part of the conversation and being included, shifting it now to talk about welcoming language. And that seems to be resonating a little bit more. Again, a little bit, sometimes as communications people, we're evolving the narrative a little bit. Yeah. It's still serving the same purpose to have welcoming language that has the customers that we're speaking to feel welcome, that it's the right type of language that they see themselves in that discussion. So similar to where we were with inclusion, but I feel like that's where we're evolving a little bit to address that.
That's so interesting. This is a little bit of an aside, but I think a lot about the kinds of words. So I think this comes from my acting background, actually. So in acting, certain, philosophies would say that you are always acting out some kind of objective. You have something you want to achieve, a goal, and then you have certain tactics. And some of those, and you have to choose the tactics carefully, because some of them, there are certain things that you can do that you can control, and there are certain things that are more about the person receiving on the other side, right? And so just kind of considering the words alone to include someone, I feel like we associate that more with someone feels included. That's the result. Yeah. But to welcome someone is a bit more of an active word that the person offering is able to control. Yeah. And I think feeling included is actually less controllable, right? It really is in that how it's received. But welcoming is more active and acting. You'd prefer to welcome someone than to include them in a way. So that's really interesting, that shift. And obviously there are, other, as you said, like political pressure and some other reasons that language is being re-examined right now.
It's funny. I mentioned to you, I was at another conference this weekend, and the topic was women's health, and there was a big focus on menopause, which, by the way, 1 million women in the world are in menopause, which I was kind of struck by that number. Yeah. But one of the speakers had on her slide saying, like, what she often hears is women are like, I wasn't invited to the menopause party. And again, I think it's like, I think there has been a big pivot now with the number of women in menopause and having a voice and using social media and sharing new data information, that it's, I think, getting more onto the main stage. Mm-hmm. But this idea of like, oh, no one invited me to the party. This idea of like, we have to welcome people in, and we need to use language that says, here's, a health topic. Here's what we want people to know. You fit into this population. We're welcoming you. We're inviting you in. Here are the tools that you need. Here's the data that you need to make decisions and to care for your health.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I love that. I was thinking too about some of what you were saying about addressing and the, even other examples. I've worked on internal communications. This is a much lower stake example than some of the ones you were speaking about, where something like new job hires, right? And they were like, you know what? If we miss even one person, we blew it. Cut the section. Like we can't go there. And so I think there are some tactical considerations too, where it becomes, if we can't do this sufficiently across the board and fairly and equitably, then we maybe can't do it at all, even though we'd like to. But it also makes me think about the idea of like reacting versus, not everything needs a statement. Sometimes the stronger thing to do is build your own program that demonstrates day in and day out what kind of commitments you have or what your stance is on something. We know organizations have sustainability initiatives, DEI or similar initiatives, like all small business support initiatives, accelerators. They're supporting research. There's far-reaching kind of, they're wrapping their arms around a lot of different ideas and initiatives, and I think maybe pointing to those consistent things where they're supporting with resources, they're supporting with funding, is a way to stay above the fray a little bit, but still make your point of view known.
And you were reminding me too, another part of like, there's what the company can say, but the company is all the people that work there. And so again, we were talking earlier about like having LinkedIn strategies for different leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know the different topics that different leaders are feeling passionate about, and you have that leader who they want to talk about, just women's leadership or healthcare disparities or DEI or whatever that
mm-hmm.
topic is. There are times too where maybe that company's not making a statement on something, but different leaders that have that relevant voice who are seen as an expert, are ways that you can address topics at like a second tier. So I did talk about kind of the criteria to tier it. There's some things that make sense that the company is addressing it and saying something, or the company's not. Well, maybe the company's not addressing it, but it makes sense for their chief medical officer or their chief human resources officer or some other relevant leader in the organization maybe is commenting on LinkedIn. Or we were also tracking, oftentimes when our leaders were speaking at an event. So if something happened yesterday and one of your executives getting on the main stage today, what makes sense that they're not tone deaf? So maybe it's something that the company's not going to issue a press release about, but you don't want to be tone deaf. Some tragedy happened yesterday and you're acknowledging it.
Of course.
And then is it a tragedy that the company's putting dollars behind it? Or, so again, that's where I was talking to you about like, what are those degrees? It's not like we're saying something, we're not saying something.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things. Again, we have all of these different levers, and there's ways that a company can like take a leading stance on a topic, or maybe they're joining a coalition that's making a donation and sending resources where environmental tragedy happened. Or maybe it's the leader is at a speaking event and is addressing it and showing that they're aware of what's happening in the world today. So again, that's where having some metrics, having some degrees, and having what the process is to say, here's what's happened and here's what the company is or isn't going to say on that topic today.
It's interesting. This is more on an individual level, but it makes me think about, I think to some extent, this sort of proliferation of social media. There's this way in which things can feel like, if I didn't post about it, like, did it happen? Honestly,
if it didn't show up in my feed, did it happen?
Yeah, and especially when you talked about like making a donation or something like that, and yeah, I mean, honestly, I even think about that sometimes. Not that I necessarily want to, but it's like, well, if I were talking about, some charitable organization I'm supporting, there's pros, there's cons. Like, is that on brand for me from a professional context? Could it maybe get more people interested? Perhaps, but also like, do I need to tell everyone, I also wouldn't want to feel like I'm trying to tell everyone how great I am. So I don't know. I just think I do think the ability to share anything and everything instantly sometimes makes us feel like we need to, and that there are other ways that can be meaningful to make a statement, if not in such formal terms, or have an impact.
You said something too that reminded me. I've worked with a lot of leaders where I've encouraged them to share content on LinkedIn, for instance, or give a speech. And then there are, some that say, oh, but I don't want to be self-promoting. This is on behalf of the company. But you are the company. And it is a lot more interesting, again, back to metrics. If you look at like LinkedIn content, a person's LinkedIn content generally gets a lot more eyeballs and audience than companies. So your story is, helping and serving the company. So, there are times as a communications, leader where you're working with the executives to have the confidence to say, oh, yes, sharing content will help your own image and will make you more visible. But that's also part of your role in the company, and you're helping the company by sharing this information. So, not having that fear of like, oh, this is self-promotion. It can serve yourself and the company at the same time.
Yeah, 100%.
It's a responsibility too. That leader has to make sure that they're going through the right process, that the company is comfortable with what it is.
Definitely. I've definitely, worked with folks who have come in and said, I I liked the wrong post, or like I did, and it would still be like a within their organization, but it was like they didn't follow like a very rigidly prescribed, here's what you can like, here's what you can comment, here's what you can repost, but you can't cross-pollinate. And, and so are very, very hesitant to kind of put themselves back out there again, with good reason. Totally understand that. There's a lot at stake.
Right.
It's interesting you talking about the individuals. I've spent a lot of time, not all of the work we do is thought leadership, but we do quite a bit of work with executives and experts and elevating them as thought leaders. And I've really come to believe that a company is not a thought leader, that thought leaders are people. So when, there's another term for, I would call that like other kinds of expert-led content, and thought leadership is one type of expert-led content, but thought leadership is like a person. It's authored, it's from an individual, and that can't really be on the company level. So yeah, it's right. Just kind of ties into that.
Just coincidentally, I'm reading Sapiens right now. It's a long book. I'm only at the beginning, but it talks about like why the first company started, because it was individual people, and there was a lot at stake, and you could start a company and it could fail, and you could lose everything, including your home and your children. Like so there was a reason why like that first company was started. So if you want to read the history on it, but again, it's something we've created, that a company exists. It's made up of individual people and people who make the decisions. So exactly. Again, it's like, that's why the LinkedIn content from the people, the leaders, the employees really is got a lot more visibility than the corporate company channel.
Absolutely. I could keep going here, but I'm mindful of our time, and I want to make sure we get to our lightning round. So if it's okay with you, I'd love to transition into our segment called The Last Word. All right. So I ask every guest the same 5 questions, kind of rapid fire. Here we go. Question number 1. What's your favorite word to say out loud?
My favorite word, and I say it every day or more than once a day, gratitude.
Oh, I love that.
Yes. I mean, I just feel it feels good to say. It feels even better to live with gratitude. And I feel it applies both at work, and it helps keep us grounded, and it's very true in my life. And it's something I try to say every day. So, I have gratitude for you for having this forum for us to have this conversation.
Likewise, I have gratitude for you. It does feel good. Question 2. What's a word you know from reading, but you're afraid to say out loud because you're not sure how to pronounce it?
Cacophony.
I think you got it.
I think I got it. But I love how it sounds, and it's like this beautiful word that talks about something that's messy. And again, just as a communications person, like I find that fascinating. It's like so pretty sounding, but it means something messy. And so, and again, as a communications person, I'm like about creating clarity and minimizing cacophony.
Love it. Question 3. What's one phrase or saying you wish could be retired for good?
Let's circle back.
It's a good one.
I just don't like that. It's just like you're just postponing the inevitable. I want to say, let's decide. Let's act. Let's take action. And let's get rid of cliches that hold us back and slow us down.
Fair enough. I'm personally not much of a fan of the royal we in general. Like we don't do anything, right? You do it or I do it. But one of us is going to do it. Yeah. So which one?
Exactly.
Question 4. What's a communication hill you're willing to die on?
I mean, no surprise. Transparency. I'm always about share what you can, when you can, and explain the why behind it. And share what you can share. But again, I think, we live in a world where I don't think people expect perfection, but they expect honesty. So, we've talked a lot about that today, but when you communicate openly, even in uncertainty, you can earn credibility that really lasts.
People don't expect perfection, but they expect honesty. I'm going to take that one home with me. Yeah, I love that. Question 5. What's the last thing you read, heard, or watched that really stuck with you?
All right, I'm like currently obsessed with Mel Robbins' 8 Things to Tell Yourself Every Morning.
Okay.
And I have a group of friends, and we're texting each other. Like the first one is like, today is going to be a great day. And my one friend Norma we text each other every morning, like some visual or something that's like reminding ourselves today is going to be a great day. And there's a list of 8. I would definitely check it out. And it ends with, I have an important contribution to make in the world. So I think they're just really powerful reminders to tell our brains. And again, it comes back to the storytelling. The stories that we tell ourselves, our brain, we believe. We have 60,000 thoughts a day. And if we tell our brain positive stories, today is going to be a great day, is going to shape what we believe. And so what's more important, the best story we can tell is the story we're telling ourselves. So back to like our jobs as storytellers, I think about the stories I'm telling myself as well as what I'm telling the outside world.
That's awesome. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. If listeners want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
They can check me out on LinkedIn, Kimberly Callahan Fox. I don't know the whole URL, but that's me on
find
LinkedIn.
You there, and we'll get the link in the show notes as well for you.
Awesome. Great.
Rick, thank you so much. Really loved this conversation, and I can't wait to share it with folks.
Thanks, Kristen. This was a lot of fun.
That's it for this episode of Expertly Said. We're produced by Every Little Word, a boutique content and communications agency. If you liked what you heard, you know what to do. Subscribe, share the episode with a colleague, or leave us a review. If you want to connect with me directly, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Kristen Sweeney. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.